Benjamin, welcome to the Retail Horror Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Michelle. I'm so glad to do this.
Do you prefer Ben or Benjamin?
This is why I go by Ben in my private life and then Benjamin in my professional life. Because somebody would call me and I might just pick up the phone and just start talking about whatever wackadoodle things on my mind. So if they ask for Benjamin, then I know that, oh, I don't know this person so well. Maybe I shouldn't,
Okay,
be
good.
so honest.
Okay, good. Because I just want to make sure we didn't talk about this. Just the story, the background story of this interview is that we had a really long and lengthy, amazing conversation. And then you left and you were like, okay, can we maybe redo that? Because we are both, I don't know, I can say for myself, I am ADD. Are you ADD as well?
I'm sure I'm on the spectrum. Yes.
So you get two ADD people together, and the conversation was like all the fucking over the board. So
It
we
was,
both
yeah.
decided, let's do this again, and we're gonna do this again. I was introduced to you by my intern. You are her professor, but your history in graphic design and manufacturing goes deep, and it's one of the coolest brands ever, Paul Frank. So I want you to tell a little bit about yourself right now, like your personal part, and then dip in a little bit into Paul Frankland, and I'll interject questions as we go.
Great. Okay, so my name is Ben. I'm basically a graphic designer, creative director. Right now, I'm the vice president of creative services for Igloo Coolers. That's right, we make coolers in Texas. We've been around since 1947. And so I work on that stuff. But man, my whole ride into this was so wild. I worked at Trader Joe's doing chalkboard signs. And I met Paul, and Paul was like, hey, do you know how to help with this? And I never went home. And so like I got in on the ground floor at Paul Frank. It was my first job. I basically brought my computer from home, and until they could buy me a computer, I was working, right there next to Paul. Over his shoulder, he'd look over my shoulder and see what I was doing. He'd try to draw on my screen with his pencil. Like it was really early days. Just the two of us trying to figure out a lot of stuff.
What year was
But
this?
yeah, this was 1998, like late 98. Yeah.
Oh my God. And how old are you? Just so everyone has some perspective.
I am 48, but I think when I started, I was probably about 24 years old.
And you were a graphic artist, but had you worked, because I think we were talking about the system you were on was your dad's system that you learned how to illustrate on,
Yeah,
correct?
so yeah, my dad, he worked for the government, the Navy, and they got this machine. It's like a sign cutter, right? Like they're really popular now. You just like they print and cut at the same time. But they got one at work and he got really excited about it, brought me in and had me learn this program called Corel Draw, which nobody uses. It was like I was using this crazy outdated program trying to draw these Paul Frank graphics, hiring people to come help me. I'm like, hey, you got to learn Corel Draw. And they're like, what? Nobody uses this. But I eventually learned the Adobe Illustrator and got with it. But yeah, wild times.
Uh, I told this story, Elisa, who is our digital marketing brand. She has two young kids. Well, they're not young now, but when they were in school, Paul Frank used to have the big warehouse sale, and where moms and kids would line up around the block in order to go buy samples. And I mean, that brand is like, for those of you who don't know, you need to look it up right now. Most of you know this brand because it's like the monkey behind you is, what's his name again?
His name's Julius.
Julius. Why the name Julius?
Oh my gosh, I
Do we
can't
know?
remember why Paul. It's been so long since I worked at Paul Frank. I used to know all this stuff, but it was I think it was Paul's grandpa. His name was Julius.
I love this brand so much. I've told the story that I've had stores and Fred Siegel, and that brand when I had my stores was like the brand to have. And I wanted that brand so fucking bad. And I think it was Ron Robinson that had it that I wasn't allowed to carry it. But that line is iconic. Tell us a little bit about what a day in the life of an illustrator or graphic artist looks like, starting from the ground zero. Because like what people don't realize is like this is like garage style startup. This is not, walking into like a Quicksilver that's all set up.
Yeah, when I started, they were trying to get ready for a trade show. And it was like, Ben, like, we need you to put together a line sheet. And so I had never built a line sheet before, which is basically like a catalog of everything you sell. And then like what is in the catalog, because we didn't have like digital photography or anything slick like that. So I had to like trace all the items we made with a line drawing to put in this line sheet. And it was like we had a lot of items. And so it it took a long time. So like I would basically sit there and Paul would, like I said, with a pencil on top of my screen, like draw how to fix the lines. And then I had this bubble jet printer, this inkjet printer. You remember those things? They take a long time to print like
Yes.
one
Yeah.
paper. And like they'd want to see like a version of it. So I'd print it and then it would take like an hour for the whole thing to print. And so we'd work late into the night. I'd be up, 11, 2 a.m. or whatever, printing one of these out. And Paul and I'd just basically take a nap. He'd be on a couch and I'd go sleep in the sock bin. And while we're getting a line sheet out, so we could look at it and go, okay, this is right, this is wrong, or whatever. And that was a little bit of it, but it was like, we were just a gang of kids, the founders, Paul, John, and Ryan. There's 3 owners that were in the building. We had a sample sewer and a guy who was shipping stuff in the warehouse. And it was so small and it was so fun. I mean, it was just like, how many people was that I just listed? About 6 people. And it was tiny. I mean, we had snacks that you could just go and get a soda or whatever. And because once you get too many people, then the snacks are like a no-go because it costs too much. But I mean, and like friends would come by and people would come by and it was just like such an exciting time. I had just come from Trader Joe's and I never had worked as a graphic designer professionally. And so it was so great to not have to, check people out at a register or stock groceries, but to
because you guys said you had to do everything. If I know right, Trader Joe's, much like they say Home Depot, like ask me anything. They're supposed to be working in it, but you guys worked in every single department, which I think is brilliant on the retail side of it.
We did. So like we'd have to build a trade show booth and down in our warehouse there, Jay would get his scroll saw and he'd start cutting out the things that we wanted to build and we'd start painting it. And Jay and I would fly to Vegas to set up, the trade show booth and we'd be screaming at each other like about how we're going to do it. And then by the time we're done, we're like, okay, let's go get some food. Like we'd be after we're done setting up, it was all handshakes and high fives, but man, it was like, oh my God, brutal. Just work. And what's great about those trade show spaces, if you remember, like, dude, they'd be open all night. So we'd be working till like 4 a.m., just all day, all night just to get it done.
And P.S. they don't, and I learned this from setting up booths at Magic, like they don't air condition, like in the dead of summer, they don't air condition it until the fucking buyers show up. It's like, I remember vividly being in, and this is years ago because I don't do like temp booths for apparel anymore, but I remember being in somebody's booth and the girl that my old intern was over there ironing backdrops and she was like a girly girl. She wore full makeup every day. And I was always like, girl, like you look way too nice, like jewelry, accessorized, the whole thing. And I remember looking over at her and it was like her ironing and it was like 120 degrees. It felt like outside.
God.
And she's ironing and you can just see like literally her face is melting off her. I'm all, I bet she wish she didn't wear makeup now, but that setups in that condition are brutal.
Right. Yeah. And, when you're working tight with somebody, you're both smelly and you're like, oh, well, I got used to him, like.
Talk about the day, because we talked about this and we've talked about it with Dale from Caton. We've talked about it with a lot of people. The Vegas show you were at, was that ASR?
This was WWD Magic.
Oh my God. So, okay. So talk a little bit about the shows during that day, because a lot of people have not been in retail like that for that long. And a lot of people are gift retailers that listen to this that haven't seen like what the apparel shows, like now they're so like homogenized compared to what, if that's a word to use for, compared to what they used to be like. So talk a little bit about like, you guys are done, you go home for the night, the next day now you have to be in the booth selling. Talk a little bit about those days, because that's,
oh my God, the trade show times were just so crazy. I mean, so we don't have Instagram or social media, so nobody really knew what anybody was doing. I mean, websites were barely around, and the trade show was just such an exciting, if you're young and you don't remember trade shows, I mean, it was like such an exciting thing. It opens up and it's like, there's everybody who you know and you don't know, just displaying like their brand in a way and all their new products, and everybody walking around is so cool. There's like so much to bring in your eyes. You're just like, what is happening? And all these cool people are there. Everything looks so great. I mean, at the end of towards the end of my employment, I think we were spending like $200,000 just to have the show there, just to be there. And it was like, could you imagine what you could do with all that when it comes
Wow.
to displays
And that
and
back
the
in the
booth?
day.
And yeah, and it was like, it was just so much to see and look at. It was like Instagram in real life, I guess. Right.
I know. I wish so bad. Like, I was talking about, and now, of course, I can't remember it again, is the documentary they did on one of the lines from back in the day. And their booth at these shows, and they talk about it, it was magic. And it was like, there were strippers on poles. There were guys like doing pinstriping on lowriders. I mean, it was so over the top. Like, it was the funnest show. That and ASR were the two funnest shows, I swear, to be part of. And I can't
It
even
was.
imagine trying to do that and, go to parties after and then show up the next day all hungover, or even like you haven't even gone to sleep yet.
Oh, and it was all that, and you're right. Like you go to the show, it closes at 6. Everybody goes to dinner and parties afterward. And then after dinner, everybody goes and parties,
Oh my
and then
God.
everybody tries, and then you're back in your room like 3 a.m. or whatever, and then you got to be up at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, because everybody wants to meet at the booth and they want to check off on the day and talk about what they're gonna do, and it's just like wasted. But those early days of Paul Frank, we were really scrappy. And I remember all us guys, we all had one room. And so it wasn't like everybody
Ah.
got a bed. It was like you got a spot on the floor that you could sleep, that where you could sleep. And it was, you walk in the room and you're like stepping over people. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to sleep right here. And I hope nobody messes with me, like, because you could be a butt of a joke if you weren't
Oh my
careful.
God. I can't even imagine that, because I refuse to room with people. So that would not have bode well with me.
Yeah, right. So, whew, those are just like crazy, crazy times. And at that time, so Paul Frank, there's a lot of heat on our brand, and we were looking to expand. And I remember we hired this apparel designer to come in. Ryan wanted to make sportswear apparel for us. You know who we hired? We hired Philip Lim. Do you know
Oh
Philip
my
Lim?
God. Shut up.
I
Oh
know,
my God.
right?
You didn't talk about this the last time. Oh my God.
I know,
That's
this is why I'm like,
crazy.
I never even talked about this. So this girl we knew who was like around our brand, and like when we were doing this, I'm not cool, but what Paul was doing was really cool and attracted like just the neatest people. So this girl Olivia, she had this friend Philip, and she's like, "Oh, my friend Philip would probably be a good designer for you." And so Philip comes in, designs our sportswear brand, and I had never been around sportswear design or fashion design, and it was like the stuff he was coming up with was so incredible
I'm
and so
trying to
beautiful. I
Google
hadn't
it right now. I want to see if
it
I can
didn't
pull anything up.
Yeah, and it's funny because like what we know about Paul Frank now, it's like this character brand, and it's like it's got this naive kids look to it, but it wasn't like that back then. Back then, Paul was he wanted to be like Charles and Ray Ames and do houseware furnishings, and it was this Americana vibe to it, this Wes Anderson kind of world that
Yeah,
he was
very Wes
building.
Anderson. That's a great way of putting it.
And so Philip Lim came into it, and it was like I think it threw off the creative a little bit, but what Philip did was so like neat and interesting, and he was just like the sweetest guy, very like soft spoken, and like it's so crazy now that Philip is like this big name now, and I don't know if he'd remember me, but I was so tiny back then that he used to have me wear his samples for him because I guess he needed somebody to put it on so he can make sure the pants are fitting right or something like that. And so I was the fit model for a little bit there.
I I had no, so after how long was Philip there for, and then who came in behind him? Because the brand, like, at one point every celebrity in the city wanted to wear this, and you and I had talked about like people doing walkthroughs of like like famous people, like, oh hey, there's so and so in the warehouse. And
It was, what had happened. We had this marketing guy who on the side, his name's Austin Brown. He would like give these gift packages to people. And I remember like gift packages going to like Luscious Jackson or Dido or,
I
Anthony
know, oh my God, is
Kiedis.
her
And
name.
by 2001, it was really common to see a lot of people wearing, the products. And I could, the celebrity list goes on and on. But in those early days, it was just like this. When Massimo came in and purchased the company, he described he described the way our brand worked was like we were like a secret. We were like a joke, like not a joke, but like if you're playing a prank and everybody's in on it, but the people who don't know about it, like we were like that secret that everybody knew. And that's how it was in the beginning. And I think that, it just went well with, I don't know, the exclusive culture of, celebrities and what they wear and what they do and who they know. So that was exciting.
When did Massimo come into it? Because a lot of people only know him from, unfortunately, the latest things, but he had his own like sportswear brand, and then he took the helm of parts of Target, and then
Right. So Massimo actually bookends my experience with Paul Frank, right? Which is so funny because Ryan Hauser had worked at Massimo, I think in marketing, and then he took some side money and started, Paul Frank with Paul and John. And so so Massimo knew Ryan, and then 10 years later they decided to sell the company, and Massimo bought the company in what, 2008. And so he came on board and he came in the building and was managing, like this is what the brand should be in a way.
how I can imagine that kind of changed the dynamic of, because I know a lot of people when they do takeovers, they buy the company, it goes from like kind of loosey goosey, and everyone's it's still a running company, but it's a lot looser, and then someone comes in and starts tightening everything up. And I know you don't want to talk, I doubt there's anything bad, but I'm sure that things changed a bit.
They did, and I'm jumping here, but that's okay. So when Massimo came in, the Paul Frank became a business. Before then, it was kind of, of course we were making money, and we wanted to make profits, but we were more about having fun and like trying to do things that were interesting and weird and kind of I don't know, in a way blowing money. Let me give you an example. So we Ryan and some of the guys in the company, Chris Lisk, we started this band called the Bear Claws, right? And this was like a joke band because whenever we had like a show or a runway show or a party, the Bear Claws would play, and it was like just my partner Brad Blankenship was a singer, Chili McCabe was a singer, and they're kind of chubby, and they take off their shirts and they sing about food but we were doing this show, and I told Ryan, I'm like, hey, these kids are playing Super Mario Brothers songs on this marimba, and it's like a hit on E-Bomb's World. And Ryan's like, let's fly them out here for a show. So Ryan just spends like, I don't know, probably an amount of money we don't want to hear about, like 10, 15 grand, flying these kids out here, putting up in hotels just so they could play a marimba to open up for us, and that's what I mean. Like we were doing things like that. And once Massimo came in, it was not about that anymore. It was about, this is a business now, we're going to make money, and me being naive and young, like I didn't quite understand that. And it just didn't work well with me. I'd still like fallen in love with the early Paul Frank and what it was and what was behind it. And I felt like it was gone
It
by
takes
that point.
a lot of the creative. I mean, part of what I think what is so fun about brands like in the beginning is like doing stuff like that, and it's still a business, but it's like loosey goosey. I mean, it's like it's fun, and it exudes fun, and that's part of what. And I know everything is a business in the end of the day, but I mean, I can imagine why that it felt like that a little bit, especially creatively. I'm sure it wasn't like free flow anymore. There was a little bit more boundaries, and
Yeah, it's kind of like when you work with a marketing person and that marketing person's telling you why everything, like they're defining why everything's so cool, and you're like, well, it doesn't sound cool when you define it. Like it's just cooler when you do it. But I mean, we were doing, like we were talking about the access to celebrities and how, like, what was going on. And I remember, like, I don't know how she got in there, but what's Elvis Presley's daughter's name? Is it Lisa Marie Presley?
yeah.
So Lisa Marie, we did a collaboration with the Elvis estate, and she came in to shop, and
Oh,
it
I
was,
remember that, the Julius in the white jumpsuit.
that's right.
Oh my
Yeah. So
God.
I mean, like, just, like if Paul wanted to do something, we just call up the Elvis estate, and Lisa Marie Presley comes by with the granddaughter, with her daughter, and they shop. They go in the warehouse and they shop. And at this point, we're like a really small place. We're like, I want to say 3,000 square feet. We're not. It's not a very big building, and so we're all like peeking around, like, oh, there she is. Like that's. And it was so like just cool, just seeing Lisa Marie, like that's Elvis's daughter. What a
Wow, I just
what a
got
trip
chills.
that is. Yeah, so Well, didn't she end up marrying Michael Jackson?
Yes, that was a whole
No, we.
oddity. Like, talk about like off the rails. Oh my God. I remember and this is like has nothing to do with anything, but I just still remember you just said that and it just flashed in my head. I think it was the Emmys or the Academy Awards, and they were up on stage together, and he said something and they embrace in this kiss, and it was so fucking awkward. It was like, okay, it was so weird. And you just said that, just like shot in my head right now. Oh my God.
But wow, so interesting. So I mean, just things like that would happen, and just the crew that we had, and even the warehouse kids, they were all like these hard. There's this scene that happened out here in the West Coast and East Coast, the straight edge scene. I don't know if you remember straight edge being a thing.
Mm-mm.
But all these straight edge kids came and worked in our warehouse, and there was this camaraderie going on
What
with
is a
all.
straight edge? Give me a definition of what a straight edge is.
Yeah, so like straight edge is like it's this thing where you don't do drugs and you don't drink, and like it's Minor Threat did this song about straight edge, and they kind of started this like thing, but it became really big back then in the early 2000s. All these bands, like, I don't think AFI is straight edge, but that's kind of like the vibe and the look. Like, they're all like goth looking, they wear black, and they were just these like kids that loved hardcore music, which is, a lot of screaming and heavy guitars. And these kids, like, they would work
Wow.
all night shifts sometimes to pack boxes to, got to get all the boxes out the door, listening to hardcore music blasting. And I remember, like, things got so crazy, and they dare each other to do things. That this one kid on a dare, he ate a mouse. Like, they had caught
What?
a mouse in the warehouse. Yeah, and this kid, he 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 put the mouse in it. He put the mouse in his mouth and drank it down with soda, and like it became like this legend there at Paul Frank. And so in the art department, we decided to make a character after him. The guy's name is Ben the Warehouse Mouse. Is the little character that we did at Paul Frank. Made T-shirts and accessories, and that was a story that we told
My
retailers when.
mouth is like fucking hanging over. Okay, I need to ask what happened to the kid after like what did he get sick? Like what happens when you eat a mouse?
I mean,
A
yeah,
live
well,
mouse.
he ended up keeping it down, but not like it wasn't without all the other guys, making sounds and stuff, and but
Oh my God. Wow, I'm like
yeah,
nauseous now.
that was a legend. Another thing that happened that reminds me, when I think of the warehouse, these stories come to me. And one day Gene Simmons calls, right? Just calls. Some guy in the warehouse picks up the phone. He's like, "Hey, Paul Frank," and he's, "Hey, this is Gene Simmons. I want to talk to Paul." And he's like, "What the fuck?" And then he's like, "Okay, hold on." He hangs up the phone. I mean, puts it
Please.
on hold, and it's like, "Dude, I don't know what's going on," And so he goes upstairs and gets Paul on the phone, and Paul picks up the phone, and Gene Simmons just starts yelling at him. And I didn't explain why Gene Simmons is yelling at him.
Oh, wait, didn't you guys do okay, go
Yes, what had happened is we were making T-shirts, and we're like a young art department. We don't know what licensing is. We just thought it'd be funny to make like 4 Juliuses, right, with the
on.
Kiss makeup on each one, and we sell the shirts. And so that's what prompted Gene to call and yell at Paul. Like, Paul picks up the phone, and Gene's like, "You're stealing money from me. You're taking money off my plate and stealing it from me." Like, he's just like yelling. And Paul, if you know Paul, he's like this really sweet, like, if I could describe, I think my buddy described Paul the greatest way, and that's he's like Herman Munster. You ever watch the Munsters? He's like this gentle, he's kind of a
Gentle
tall
Giant.
guy. Yeah, and he's like really gentle and soft, and like, so he's like, I didn't know, and so, like, I guess what ends up happening is we have to reverse license the product, and then we learn about licensing the hard way.
Oopsie. Yeah, I bet I because you guys all being creative, it's like I can imagine being in those meetings like, what if we do this and what if we do that? And I mean, you guys knew enough to call Elvis, but I guess Kiss was out of the question.
Oh, dude, all kinds of people. We called Oscar Mayer. Paul wanted to work with Oscar Mayer Wieners, and
That would
he
have been
wanted to
rad.
work with John Deere, and he wanted to work with
Oh my God,
Shag.
didn't they do? I thought they did a collab with John Deere.
We did, yeah. We did a collaboration with John Deere. We went over there, saw the whole their their operation in Moline, Illinois, and but like we're like these kids at Paul Frank, and we're like, we want to do this stuff, and they don't get, they're like, oh, we make tractors, and like, here, use our new logo. And we're like, no, we want to use your old logo. And they're like, but the new one, and it when you're young and you're doing something different, it's really hard to, I think, convince people that aren't on board, like what you're doing. Oscar Mayer, Dr. Scholl's, like, Paul wanted to work with all these companies that just didn't get like why they were cool.
Did they do Oscar Mayer and Dr. Scholl's?
We did. We made, you remember those wood shoes that Dr. Scholl's made?
I love Dr. Scholl's. Are you kidding me? I want those things to come back.
Yeah, they're great. They're great looking shoes. And I mean, we worked with all kinds of weird brands like that. Some other things not so weird, like Shepard Fairey. Meeting Shepard Fairey back in 2000 was just a mind-blowing experience for me. Like, just seeing this guy doing this graffiti artwork, it was so cool.
Oh, wow. That's right. Okay, so Shepard, just so for people that don't know, Shepard created the Obey logo, correct? That it's so well known, and he is insane. Like, his artwork is so rad. And
just like the nicest dude you'll ever meet. You think this graffiti guy that goes up and vandalizes millions and millions of dollars of surfaces, he's like the sweetest, most humble guy. Super cool.
I heard that about him.
Yeah, and his wife too. His wife's great.
I can't imagine being, because it's like I started to say, like, where, like, being at a table with a bunch of creative kids, like what you guys could come up with. And that's what I think is still, to me, the brilliance of bringing on young kids, and that their minds are just like open and they're like sponges, and they just like, let's do this. And they, like, the older generation, I can understand why the John Deeres and the Dr. Scholl's just didn't get it. But it's like the vision that creatives and young creatives have is so incredible.
Yeah. And there's this thing that my buddy used to say that worked there. His name's Parker Jacobs. Parker would say, don't make stuff that's fun, but have fun making stuff. And I think that was like one of those secret sauces that we used in making stuff, because I think that all of us hanging out and joking around with each other, it really helped us to just have fun, and whatever we were doing just came out in the products. And I was managing the t-shirts, so it was like making t-shirts was great, because it's almost like it's almost like having a sketchbook. You could draw something, it's out for a season, and it's gone. You get a whole new book of 30 pages that you can put out there. And so it was a lot of fun being able to create and do whatever we felt like we wanted to.
So, and all these collabs, you got to go be part of the original meetings and see everything, get inspired.
Yeah, that was great too. We worked with working with Shag and working with the Barbie estate. One of the things that I just remember the most, not Barbie estate, but we worked with Barbie. We made made like a Barbie doll with little Paul Frank pajamas. Now, I didn't work on that thing. My buddy Parker did, and so that was great about me and Parker. We kind of just yin and yanged each other. Sometimes he was on things, and sometimes I worked on things. So yeah, it was great just having a buddy like that next to you, just like him. It almost felt like being married,
Well, you're kind of in the trenches together, like good stuff happening in the shit trenches. Like, at least you have somebody there that, you can lean on and like, joke or cry.
Yeah, and it's not that Paul wasn't there. I mean, Paul was busy. We left Paul to his own devices. He liked making buy cars and paint cars and fiddle around in his workshop, and I don't know, he makes these giant dioramas. If you look him up, you'll see he makes these characters out of like vinyl, and he would just do his own thing, and Parker and I would just manage, like what the art that the company needed. Yeah.
What an insane experience. Is Paul Frank, is he one of the instructors at OC? Because you were at the OC College of Fashion. Is he a teacher, or has he been a speaker? I thought I read that.
Yeah, so I teach a class called Design Thinking at OCC, Orange Coast College, down here in Costa Mesa, and that was Paul's class. So Paul, like
wasn't
Paul
just
went to OCC and learned how to sew, right? And this is crazy. So his like mentor, Chris Amaral, she like ran the fashion program. She would get us interns all over the place. So he created a class with her called, you know, where kids come in and they learn about design and, you know, like how to think like a designer. And I took over the class 2 years ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. And yeah, I love it. But yeah, he was teaching there, but Paul lived all the way up in like Pasadena, and he'd drive down every day down to Costa Mesa to teach these kids. And I think maybe it just wore on him. And
I can't even
yeah,
imagine going, okay, my professor is Paul Frank. Like, I can't even imagine that at all. Like, I mean, unless they don't know who he is, like, unless it's like, oh, it's some designer from back in the 90s. But like, I mean, holy shit, that's pretty amazing.
yeah, I'll tell you what, he does workshops all the time. If you follow him, I think it's what's his Mr. what's his, Hey Paul Frank is his Instagram handle. And like he's always doing these workshops where he teaches people how to sew, and like just he's definitely got a presence. Like he's just this almost, you know, a little bit like Mr. Rogers too. Like he's just so calm and sweet and like the greatest guy.
You have to help me get in touch with him because I sent him a DM, but I have a feeling he's not on his Instagram very often, or he doesn't do it. And I wasn't following him, so it goes, when you don't follow somebody, it goes into like a request box. So if no one, but I'm like, I would love to interview him, and if you can get him to return a DM.
Absolutely, I'll reach out on your behalf. Yeah.
So talk to me about you leave you end your days at Paul Frank, and you went off to create something else, which was pretty cool as well.
Oh, so we're moving on from Paul Frank. Okay, so yeah, I mean,
We don't have to.
and that's fine. Like, but so from Paul Frank, I left because like somebody had approached me. Massimo came in, and the fun was over, and so I realized that. And somebody approached me to start up my own Paul Frank, and so this gentleman, his name's Kelly Kaneda, he offered, like, he had this company called Scrapbook Originals, who would make like all this stuff for Nordstrom, you know, and all this floors, all these apparel items for Delia's. He had this sew house in
I
Westminster.
remember it.
And so I went and worked with him on developing a Paul Frank story. And we did that. We worked on it. We started pitching it to, you know, to people in New York and in LA. And what had happened was the whole housing market just crashed right then. So everyone was like, no, we're not going to take risks. I think you remember, when was this? This is like 2009, maybe
Yeah.
2010.
Eight,
And
eight, 8, 9.
2008. And a lot of people were like, we're not taking on new brands. We're only going to work with, you know, established brands. And money dried up and I was out. And so I had lost my, you know, we decided to part ways. And I was looking for a job, and I was like hustling, looking for anything. And Disney calls. Parker, my buddy, had like been working on a show called Yo Gabba Gabba with his brother, and they've been talking to Disney. And some guy at Disney is like, "Hey, you know, do you guys know any art directors?" And Parker put my name up there, and I went up to Burbank Studios, you know, and
Oh
the
my
guy
God.
tells me, this is so cool. Like when you're talking about a cartoon, they're like, "Hey, we're working on a cartoon. We're going to tell you about this character. I'm going to show you a picture of him, and then I want you to go home and draw his room." Right. And I did. And I like, it was like the test of all tests. I went home and just, from Friday afternoon till like Monday morning, I just cranked drawing this room of this character, which was based on Evel Knievel. I don't know if you remember Evel Knievel,
Yeah.
but the cartoon was going to be called
Jumping
Kid
Snake
Knievel.
River.
Yes, it was going to be called Kid Knievel. And I was like, oh my God, I could totally do this. And so I made this room for this kid who was into skateboarding and you know, doing stunts and tricks. And they gave me the job at Disney, and it was like so amazing to go from, you know, apparel to animation. And so I worked at Disney for a couple of years on that cartoon. The cartoon ended up being called Kick Buttowski, and it aired on Disney XD. And it was so great working
What
with
a
all these
cool
animators. And
experience.
yeah, like, because I was really into animation too. I loved Ren and Stimpy and a lot of cartoons around.
Love Ren and Stimpy.
You probably remember, yeah. And so I got to work on with people who worked on Ren and Stimpy and people who worked on Dexter's Laboratory and, you know, Powerpuff Girls. And it was just like that fun we had at Paul Frank, because everybody was really nerdy there. You know, when I say nerdy, you know, there wasn't anybody like dude, you don't have the right jeans on, like my jeans are so cool because they cost $450. They're a Visu, or whatever. You don't have
They're
anybody
not
doing that. So
fashionistas. They're not
no, everybody
fashionistas.
was just so
Yeah.
like into Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. And yeah, we just everybody nerded. It was great. And I still keep in touch with a lot of people there, but
How old were you at this point?
I was probably about 30. And I was riding the train from Santa Ana all the way up to Burbank every day, which was a 2 hour door to door thing. And
Oh
so
my
I'm on a train and I'm working on everything, right, on a laptop. I get on the train. There's only 4 tables. Right? There might be more now, but at that time, there's only 4 tables. So I'd run in there and grab grab a table and move away everybody so I could keep working during those commutes. And that's where I got my next gig is I started freelancing, and these guys from the toy industry, they wanted me to help them develop toy stuff. And so Brad Blankenship, he's from Paul Frank. He got me on this team with Conan Hayes. Conan Hayes is a pro surfer who
wow.
Brad was working at Ruka, and Conan was one of the founders of Ruka. And so
I
after the
love
sale of Ruka to I can't remember, to Billabong, Brad and Conan were like, "What do we do next?" And Brad's like, "I'm gonna grab Ben and let's do this thing." And so I was freelancing with them, and we came up with these helmets that have 3D parts on them. You probably see them all the time on 4th of July, cat ears and mohawks and stuff.
When I told my husband this, I was like, okay, I wasn't even expecting this part of the story and your history in the industry. Paul Frank blew my mind already, but when you start talking about this one's like, I was like, holy shit. Like you, I'll be honest, like having you on this podcast and your depth of knowledge and your depth of creativity and the brands that you have worked on and helped create it just is mind blowing to me.
Wow, thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
saying that. Man, like I feel like I'm in the dirt so much that I don't know if I get to feel like that so often,
It's
but
mind blowing. And
thank you.
because I know exactly these helmets because all the kids wear them with the mohawk.
Yeah, so I was freelancing with these guys. We developed the helmet, and they offered me equity. They're like, okay, we'll tell you what, we can't pay you what you're making as an art director, but we'll pay you this amount, and we'll give you equity. And so I'm like, I got to do it. I didn't have kids, and you really have to take your risks before you have a family because like once you have a family, you like, I got to make rent. There's no moving home for me. But I did, and we did this company Raskullz, and we waxed the floor. Bell Helmets and Schwinn, we took like a ton of their business at the time at Target and Walmart and Toys R Us and Big Five Sporting Goods. Like we just like swept the floor. We made so many kids helmets. I was basically living in Hong Kong 3 months out of the year. We had an
Wow.
apartment there, and we were just checking the factory productions, signing off on golden samples, designing new stuff. This is cool. Like, and I don't know if Simon will hear this, but I lived with this artist. His name's Simon Birch. He did this exhibit out here called, I think it's called 11th Floor Factory 11. I don't know. It's got the word 11 in it, but he's an incredible creative guy who does these giant paintings that look like, people are blurry. And I don't know. It's like, I don't know, these giant paintings. And living with this artist who was making these paintings, and he was successful. I mean, he was selling paintings for over $50,000 each.
Wow.
I know, right?
Shit.
And it was like, we'd go and do our work, and we'd come back, and Simon would grab me and my business partner. His name's Corey Ratner. Corey and I were just like joined at the hip, just doing all the development work, and we'd just be going to clubs at night and just seeing all this crazy stuff in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is like the greatest city. It's so
Amazing.
clean and it's beautiful, and like, and especially in the expats, like most people speak English there, so you can get around really easily. And it was just an incredible experience. But once again, like, scrappy. Like I slept on this bed that had a hole in the middle of it, so I had to like sleep around it. And the tub, like it didn't drain, so you'd take a shower. Like if you didn't take a shower first, you'd be like in shin deep water, and it's like
Oh,
gross. I know, and you're like, oh no, and the hot water runs out, and you're like, oh well, like got to get it done. And but that's what it takes, right? To
wait, okay, we have to go back to the bed. Why was there a hole?
I don't know. It was
Do I
just this,
want to know this?
we'd come stay with this artist, right? And we pay part of his rent, I think, to like, to stay in his house when we did. And this room just had a bed that had a hole in it, and I would just sleep around it. This was like the early days, but once we got
I
going
remember
with
about that.
Raskullz, we got a different apartment. I got to go to IKEA there and get a fresh bed, which I was so happy for. But
How did you
yeah.
how long were you living in Hong Kong? Is it like when, like I lived in Japan, but you were only allowed to live there for so long on a working visa?
No, it was more like this. Like we rented an apartment. We rented a 3-bedroom apartment, and we were there. We jump in every like 2 weeks, 2 weeks out of every 2 months, or every
Okay.
we'd be there enough that it was 90 days a year. I think 100 or 90 days a year I'd be there, and it was a lot. But we made all kinds of stuff. We made bikes and skateboards and swim programs, and yeah, it was a huge learning lesson for me on developing product and negotiating pricing, and figuring out how to make things different and new. And so that was a huge learning
Again,
lesson.
like what a dream job. I can't imagine. That's one part of the piece of the puzzle of manufacturing and design and display and whatnot that I've never been part of, and I've never seen, as far as China and like anything overseas. I haven't been a part of, and I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, and there's interesting. Like I'm talking about Hong Kong, and the other side is like going into China. Like it's different there. They're your hosts don't let you walk around on the streets out there because you get kidnapped or something. It's not that it's really dangerous, but they just don't know what would happen.
Yeah.
We go to dinners and you don't know what you're eating. Like you just have all these plates and bowls, and you're like, I don't know. And I remember eating something, and the guy's like, I'm like, hey, what is this? And he's like, oh, it's dolphin. I don't dolphin, and I'm like, I don't know. And he shows me a picture, and it's a giant salamander. I'm like, oh God. Okay. It's like
Sounds
endangered
awesome.
species, yeah. And it was like that all the time, like you'd see chicken, and you'd like, oh, chicken, and you'd eat it, but it was cold. It was like out of the freezer, and you're like, oh my God, that's not how I eat it. Or you'd see yogurt or something that was like, they go, oh, that's yogurt, and you eat it and it's hot, and you're like, why can't anything just be normal? I'll just have rice. But
I
yeah.
remember when I was in Japan, we were never, because I was a minor. I think I was 15 or 16 living
Yeah.
there. And I had a interpreter that wasn't with us all the time. Like we were let go, like we were clubbing. Like as long as you had your composite cards, you can get into any club you wanted.
Oh,
But
that's great.
I remember we had gone out to dinner with a couple clients, and sushi in Japan is very expensive. Like you just, until you were making money, you were not eating. You were eating ramen. Like you were not eating. So we go to this sushi restaurant, and it's like well, there's two stories of this. Like I'm gonna sideline us for a second, but I have a really bad thing with like wanting to touch everything and being super curious to the point of like demise. Like
Yeah.
we would go to places, and all I wanted to do, because they always have all the plastic food that I can't even believe I'm telling this.
Yeah, you want to look with your hands.
So I was always like, I want to touch it. I want to touch it. And finally we go to Harajuku on Sunday, and there's all these like open carts. And there was one cart that they had that food on display that finally wasn't behind plastic. And
Yeah.
Masamichi was our interpreter. He was always kind of like, he let us kind of go free, but he was always kind of like in the background just to make sure. And I was like, oh my God. So I walk up and I go to touch it. I stick my finger, and it's fucking real. And whatever the two people behind the counter said, Masamichi, you could see his head on a swivel, just like, Michelle, you so stupid. Like I got called stupid all the time. I was like, oh my God. So I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So now fast forward, we get taken out to dinner with whatever clients we were working for. Masamichi, of course, is there with us, and they're ordering for us. And it's sushi, so I'm like so excited. But I remember like they bring the little plate. It's a fish, and it's like it has a skewer through it and doesn't have its sides. It's just like the little fish with a skewer. and I'm just about to take a bite, and then the fish starts moving and its eyes, you can see, I'm all, oh my God, like not what you do as a guest.
Yeah.
Taken out. And I screamed and and again, Masamichi with the head on the swivel, like, Michelle, I'm like, I know, I'm so stupid.
I'm so stupid.
So that's my story of like of weird foods. And I remember like not knowing and not understanding what 90% of it, and seeing the picture, like I ate a lot of ramen, let me tell you.
Yeah. And even
I could
like
ID it.
yeah. And buying ramen there is, if you're on your own, like you got to go to this machine, you put your money in the machine, you push a button, and you don't know because it's all characters. Like you just push the button, a ticket comes out. You give the ticket to the ramen guy, and you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna get, but
oh my God, so funny. Until you just said that, and I can't even believe I just shared that story on the podcast.
That's so great.
How long were you at that? Because didn't you cashed your equity in, correct?
We did, yeah. We sold the company in 2014 to Easton Bell Sports, and that they had reformulated to become Bell Giro, BRG, Bell Riddell Giro Sports, and then now they're Vista Outdoor. But yeah, Easton Bell Sports we sold, and that was like a crazy experience because we were doing really well. We were killing it at the retail floor. And we hired this investment banker to sell our company. And it was like, you get behind a closed door and the guy's telling you, okay, only have one drink. If I tap you on the foot, that means stop talking about whatever you're talking about. It was like, it was really tense. So we'd meet with, potential buyers of the company, and, and even going through meeting Fenway partners who purchased our company. That was crazy. The whole,
I'm assuming they're all suits, right? They're all suits, and here's you guys, like this young crew of guys. I mean, you're still young. I mean,
well, me, I'm shabby because I'm a creative person, but Corey was like, he was. I mean, he at least went to college, so he was squared away, and him and his brother Ryan Ratner, they had come from generational wealth, and their dad like invented things like the Super Soaker. He had a toy company called LGN. Which made this TNC Nintendo, like, dude, their dad had so many genius toy ideas. And so they'd grown up with like this idea of, buying and selling companies. And I think that, it was, this was their crowd. I mean, their dad was always around private equity. And then Brad Blankenship, who was the president of RUCA before, coming on board, and I just felt really out of place because, I'm a creative guy who just, works on a computer, pushes undo keys and stuff and works in layers. So it was really stressful for me to be in that situation.
I can't even imagine. I know I 90% of what I wear is what I'm wearing now, and leggings. And when I'm supposed to get dressed up and go, like, it's like this full panic because it's like I suddenly don't feel like I belong at all. Like,
yeah, right.
So I can't even imagine walking into a meeting like that at all. Like,
yeah, investment bankers and all kinds of stuff like that. And even, when we got purchased by Easton Bell, the guy who founded Bell Helmets was doing the transaction on their side, and he was a great guy. His name's Terry. And it was so interesting learning the story behind Bell Helmets and how they developed, helmets, and working with people like Lance Armstrong, or, I don't know, people who race cars and salt flats. And it was like just so cool to hear all that. I mean, it was an incredible experience I'll never forget. But
I mean, so much of what you have done and seen and been around, I just, you need to write a book.
I teeter though, because like there's so many like weird things that happen that, like I don't know if like I should, like, and they're great and funny things that happen, but I don't know if I could talk about these things because they're really the interesting thing. I'm hoping that
that is what makes, I mean, truly, for a book or for an interview or for, it's all of the weird shit that no one ever believes happens, like, and it's like that is what makes it. Who wants to listen to an interview of like everything's like perfect? It's like, I think part of this podcast, one of the things that somebody had said to me, I think it was Matt from Fine Lines, was like, I'm so glad you're doing this because so many of the retail podcasts are old white guys and they're just talking money and numbers, and it's not fun and weird stories. And like I think that's what's brilliant about like what you've done and what you've seen and what you've experienced. Like, what is the craziest thing you've ever seen ever? I mean, it's kind of a broad statement, but
The craziest thing I've ever seen, I'm not sure, but I can list a couple. I mean, one of them was I was just thinking about how we sold bikes into Walmart. They ordered like 100,000 units of bicycles.
oh my
We had
God.
to, so we had to rent a warehouse and fill it with nothing but bikes. And it was like just thinking that we own the inventory. It was like that was our
Ooh.
responsibility to ship those bikes and make sure they went out on time. They got on trucks. Was like such a crazy experience, you know. I mean, that was a lot. What else? When you sell the when you do a transaction, you sell a company, what happens is they pull a trigger and all the money gets wired into your account. And watching your account go from like, you know, I have a couple, you know, I have a couple zeros in there, watching it go from that to like, you're like, oh my God, I gotta go lay down. You know,
Like
like
I can't
that
even.
is crazy.
What was the first thing you did? Because it's like, to me, like that, when that happens, whether it's the lottery or whatever, it's like, okay, we're going to fucking Europe, or we're whatever, we're buying a house in Costa Rica. I mean, what was the first thing you bought?
I'm not that, I'm not that cool. You know what we did is my business partner and I, Brad Blankenship, we held on to our money and we just bought real estate. That's all we did. We didn't do anything.
Boo. I wanted a
I took
story.
I took a picture of myself right when the transaction closed and that money was wired, because I just wanted to remember that feeling. Like I truly just laid down on my bed, just like, oh my God, that was so much stress. And like, I'm so glad it's off my shoulders. I remember like the day after when we all came back to work, we were all like high-fiving and hugging and just like, thank God it's behind us and we can move on. But um, one of the things I bought is I bought a really nice watch for my wife. I paid off like all this debt I got, you know. I got caught up in that whole the financial thing that happened, crisis.
Mhm.
I like refinanced my home, pulled all my equity out, did some dumb shit with my money, and I climbed out of that hole, and it was a learning lesson for me not to spend your money on dumb shit.
But I love you
So
bought your wife a lovely watch.
yeah, well, I mean, she deserves the world, because I mean, all the stress I went through, me flying to China. I mean, imagine being with somebody who's just like gone for 2 weeks and on the other side of the world, and you know, like she'll call me like at her daytime or whatever, and I'm like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I'm in the back of the Ferrari. I can't hear you." You know, Simon, this guy, he drove like this 1980 Ferrari. And it was really funny. Like he would come pick us up from the train station in this 1980s Ferrari, and we just, you know, drive around Hong Kong.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I could talk about these stories forever.
Yeah, wild. And so we were owned by Bell Helmets, and you know,
So
like
you
most.
guys stayed on, even though the acquisition or purchase was made, you guys stayed on.
Yeah, so you typically, when you know, when you sell a company, they try to give you like caveats to stay, right? Like if you make this goal and stay for 2 years, you can get this bonus. And so a lot of us stayed on board and really worked on Bell Helmets. And um, I was working on Bell Helmets, and on the weekend I would like fiddle around with my own stuff, you know, because I'd stay over the weekend and I'd work with partners developing other products. And I developed a cooler. I took a bicycle helmet and turned it upside down, and Brad and I, we made a cooler and we sold it into Target. And Brad and we took the risk. We're like, let's bring in 40,000 units and get a warehouse, and let's let's try this. And so Brad calls Igloo, and Brad's like, "Hey, we need, you know, you guys want to partner with us and help with distribution?" And Igloo ended up buying our company, and thank God, because like that inventory, you know, having inventory is a scary thing, and
Yeah.
it doesn't age well. You know, like it gets dusty, or who knows what it gets, you know, the warehouse gets cold and condensation can fall on it. Like it's scary, like just being in that position. So we sold to Igloo, and that was the next close I happened, and I'm still here at Igloo. I love the people here, and we were able to turn the brand around. We started in 2016, but Brad and I really started working on the brand in 2018, and that was the first step in turning the brand around. If you guys look on Instagram, you'll see that the Igloo today is very different than it was before 2018.
I am loving their campaign of like that 80s vibe of the roller skating girls and the cooler, as well as the because it's funny, we had done this interview and then we decided to redo it. And I, for whatever reason, I'm scrolling through Instagram and the igloo comes up with the speaker in it, and I'm like, I'm going to take this as a sign I'm supposed to be like texting or touching base with you to come back on the podcast, because I just came across an igloo ad.
Yeah, and that was like, this is crazy. So you know, when Brad and I get to Igloo, we see that they're doing Yeti stuff. They're making welded bags, they're making rotomold coolers, they're trying to, you know, exactly what Yeti's doing. And so they have these coolers there that are really cool looking, just like the retro things. And they're really old. They're really old. And so, and they sell for like $20 or $30, right? And so Brad and I are like, let's make these in retro colors and we're going to sell them for $75 online. And we sold out. It was crazy. We sold so many. We put them in Target, like Target has a seasonal program that we put them in, and we make soft sides to match. And it's been this massive success. But you know, what comes next? The Cool Tunes, you know, like that Playmate with the speakers in it. We used to make that back in the 80s. And we just decided to like, let's just remake it. And it's doing well. Like we're killing it. It's so great here.
You said you love everyone that works there. You talked really fondly about them. Was there because one of the things, like, we talked about this, I've talked about this with a couple of people, is that a lot of big brands, Kmart, Macy's, a lot of people have forgotten who their audience is, and there's a lot of older people at the helm. Older meaning they've been there for fucking ever, and they think the same way. They won't think outside of the box. When you guys came in with all these new ideas of making, you know, recreating and putting out stuff that already existed and making it new again, was there resistance to that?
Oh yeah, it was a bloodbath behind the scenes. Like a lot of people didn't end up working there because, you know,
this is where we always done it.
Yeah, sometimes. And I don't know, it's just, there's this, I love Buddhism. I think Buddhism is a great philosophy. And there's this saying that goes on in there. And it's about like, you know, when you use a raft to cross the river, but once you cross the river with the raft, don't carry the raft with you, you know, afterwards. And I think that's what happens to people. They just like, they're so stuck to what they know that they just carry it with them. And you know, Buddhism's about everything changes and things change. And that's, you just, you know, like that's how I'm trying to stay youthful, is I got to realize that, you know, once you learn how to do something, you got to learn how to let it go, you know, because things change. And that's what happened at Igloo. And thank God, you know, what had happened was we got in front of the board of directors and Brad and I pitched a vision, and the board of directors, they liked it, or they saw something in it and changed the leadership team to, you know, so that we could execute our vision. And
you must have been real popular at that point.
I mean, maybe and this is like not the first time it happened to Igloo. You know, they had changed ownership hands before, and some people have come in to say, hey, let's do this, let's do eco stuff, let's, you know, and it doesn't work. But I don't know, this time it just did, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for everybody who really who really sat through with, you know, the painful process of us doing this, you know.
What a cool project. You had showed me on the last one, the eco one, and it's funny because I was in Target the other day and the eco coolers are all on the end cap, and I was like, oh, look at that.
Yeah, and even that, like I invented, or I had a hand in inventing this paper pulp cooler that's made out of paper. And like just even pitching that, like, because some people were like, we don't make stuff out of paper, you know, we're about durability, we make stuff that lasts forever, but like, you know, we don't do this eco paper stuff. And just the support that's been behind it. I mean, Target, they were open to getting rid of all their styrofoam coolers and putting it in, even though it cost more than, you know, cost at least twice as much, if not 3 times as much as the styrofoam cooler. But it's just like, it's just been support all around, and I'm so grateful for that. But yeah.
What does brainstorming look like for you? I know we're getting into an hour, and I'm sorry, but it's like this conversation I love. You know, when it comes for you sitting there doing creative work and coming up with new things like a pulp cooler, what is a brainstorming look like for you? Like, where are you going and finding inspiration? Are you finding it from the archives from Igloo, or what does that look like?
You know, I'm actually I'm an odd bird, and I do things differently. When I do my inspiration hunting, I'm kind of just looking all over at stuff. I like to go to swap meets, I watch movies, I ask a lot of questions. I get into, like, if somebody does something that is like, whoa, you do what? You make fly fishing lures? Let me come over and see how you do that. Like, whatever it is, I just get into it. And I don't know, it's a connection process that happens. You ever watch those shows? What's the name of that show where that guy he meets with celebrities and he doodles on a paper, and then they talk about, he holds something and then he's like, oh, there's
Oh,
somebody
the
around here.
psychic. That he's a
Yes.
psychic. Yeah, we've been
Yeah, and
watching
it's a
that
lot.
lately.
Yeah, it's a lot like that. Like, I just start putting my pencil down, or I just start messing with something, and it just, I don't know, it just beams into my head from somewhere. And
Wow.
I like that because I try not to knock things off or knock people off. I try not to be inspired by people, because then it gets you in trouble,
Yeah.
legally or whatever. And so I just try to, like, be aware of what I see, and then, I don't know, just try to forget about it. And then if I do remember it, then it's like my version of it. I'm not referencing it exactly, but I'm like, oh yeah, remember that, or how I felt when I saw that? How do I recreate that? And yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just connecting those things. And I'm a weird, quirky person too. So
I mean, that's why I love creative people. It's always amazing to me to hear the process of design. And like, I have my own process when I'm getting ready to start doing showrooms, and it's like, part of it is going through magazines. I mean, I'm visual, so I don't find a lot of inspiration going into other people's stores. Like, I mean, there's a few retailers that I get, like Glenn Sank, who used to be the president of anthropology, used to say, I want to be gobsmacked. There's not a lot that I see that gobsmacks me, but piecing together things out of European magazines or food magazines, and, going through Pinterest, it's like, it's not the same process of you, but it kind of all comes together, from little bits and pieces from here and there to create whatever, I'm developing. But it's talking to creative people, and the process is so amazing to me, especially something that's like a tangible product.
yeah, I love that. It makes me think that if you want to create something new, you got to look elsewhere. My wife always says that you got to travel, and I think traveling is just a spot for, you got to look elsewhere. When you look for new retail spaces, you don't go look at retail spaces. You got to look at other things. And who knows? Maybe it's the way buildings stack, or maybe you'll go to gardening, a nursery, and you'll see something, be like, oh my God, I never thought of doing something like this.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll go in an art store and they have their paints displayed in some way, and you're like, whoa, what if I tried that? Or maybe you're on a construction site and you see somebody spilled resin on their jeans, and they just left them there and they're all stiff, and you're like, oh my God, what if I took some jeans and dipped them in resin and then put them up on the wall? Like, there's
Your
just,
rad installation.
yeah,
What
like
do you see just off the top of your head? Like, that's the shit that I just love.
well, and then artists, like when you go to MoMA or Broad, or like, and you go like, I just went to the Basquiat exhibit that's over
How
in
was that?
LA.
I want to go.
It's fucking awesome.
I want to
What they
go
did,
so bad.
they curated a space that looked like his warehouse. They took this, you walk through it, and they just there's like a TV with videotapes on, and like, and it looks exactly like you would think his studio would look like, right? They have the concrete floor, and paint drops on the floor, and I don't know if there's drop cloths, but it's just so inspiring. And when you think of somebody like Basquiat, who is just such a revolutionary, artist, and just, changed artwork, because before Basquiat, there wasn't that child scribbly look.
Yeah.
And you realize too, because they show his earlier work, that he didn't have to draw like that. The guy was a great artist. He could draw however he wanted. That's how he expressed himself. And it was just, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, you learn something, and then you have to learn how to let it go. And he just, forget paints and drawing. I want to paint on a door. I want to paint, I just want to do it like this. And it's just mind blowing, and that's where I get, you take thing A, and then you take thing B, and then you make thing C, like, that's just, you put it together. And
I want to go to that exhibit. Did you go to, I think it's the streets are a lot. It's the street. It was downtown LA in the Arts District. It was a massive warehouse that was all graffiti and street art.
I didn't get to see that.
Oh my God. It was
Man.
unreal. Beyond the streets. And it was hands down. It was everything from true graffiti to Shepherd stuff was there to the tattoo dude that is so famous that came up with the LA whatever sign
Oh,
hands. Yeah,
Mr. Cartoon?
it
No.
was amazing. And it
Yeah.
was I installation art for me, that's where I get a lot of inspiration is the installation arts because it's just I can't do traditional. I mean the Getty's beautiful, but give me installation art of like some rad like street art. I'm so inspired.
Yeah, and even what's that at the Broad they had this light installation thing that was like crazy. I can't remember the name of the artist, but even after you saw that light installation go on and the lines were always out the door to get in. I mean, you saw that Drake video where he did the you never call me on the cell phone, and that was the artist. And then now you see all these great light installations, and that's how it happens. I mean,
uh
thanks for all those artists out there experimenting and doing all this wacky stuff that we just don't understand when they do it. But later on, we're like, oh, that's that's where we get these ideas from. And
yeah, that's I oh God, I love it. Okay, so we've gone way past an hour. I have to ask you, what does the future look like for you right now is one of the questions, and then I have a last question for you.
oh, great, I want to retire. I'm aiming to retire. Hopefully, I can retire in about 10 years. And I want to teach full time. I want to give back to the youth. And I don't know. I think I want to start a tortilla factory or something like that and cook. I think that AI is coming in, and there's this
Yeah.
whole new generation of creative that's coming that I'm not sure if I'm trying to keep up. I'm trying to learn prompt engineering. We're learning it, but like I think that I want to chill. I
Yeah.
don't want to be stressed by deadlines or
Well, tell me where your
getting trade show
tortilla
booth stuff.
factory is. My last question is, and this has become one of my favorite questions, is what piece of advice would you have to an up and coming graphic designer or designer or entrepreneur?
Yeah, you know what? It's persistence. That I wouldn't say that I'm an exceptional like artist or creator, but I think that I've just been persistent. You're talking about how when you're making displays. I think that if you just keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, you're going to learn things. You're going to get used to how things come together, and you'll get quicker and you'll get better at it. And it's just trying and trying and trying. And you learn so much from failures, as much as, if not more, from a success. I've had massive failures in my life where I got demoted and I wasn't managing people well. And other things too, where I made inappropriate artwork or that was, or whatever it was. And like, I learned from those situations. I've had breakdowns, and I hope I've learned from that. And, I've been cruel and mean. I thought it was funny, but, hopefully I learned from that and I'm a different person. So just persistence. Just you got to get up and you got to keep trying.
I love that. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I seriously I love these conversations. Like I am so grateful that for you doing this a second time with me. I'm grateful to my intern for making this introduction because you're fascinating. What you do is fascinating.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, you interview a lot of incredible people, and to be to even just be asked,
You're
I'm
one of
really
them.
grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you.